So we are talking about Chanel's sponsorship of the boat race, which I think is a very interesting story to follow. Now, for people that don't really know what the boat race is, because if you're not in the UK, I can understand why you wouldn't be aware of it, to be very honest. So the boat race is this really historic race that happens every year between the University of Oxford and the University of Cambridge. It was established close to like 200 years ago. I think it started in 1829, and it's been a very, very iconic race that happened. So many spectators are there. There's normally like 200,000 plus spectators that watch it. Millions across the world tune in to watch it via TV. I know the BBC streams it. And funny enough, the boat race is actually tomorrow. So today they have some races, but they're like preliminary. And then the main race, like the women's race and the men's race, that actually will be happening tomorrow. So I will be watching. I'm just curious to see who wins and kind of how Chanel rolls out the marketing. So it's kind of like market research, just watching it. So it makes a lot of sense, essentially, for Chanel to be investing in the boat race. Because to me, how I see it is Chanel are actually investing in an event where their customers are. Something I've always found weird about a lot of luxury brands, a lot of fashion brands when it comes to their marketing budget and how they spend it. I've always thought it really silly that they just go to whatever has the most views, or they pay some like show or some influencer that has nothing to do with fashion loads and loads of money when their customers aren't like Chanel customers or wouldn't even be potential Chanel customers. Whereas when you look at the Cambridge and the Oxford boat race, it's a prestigious event. It's associated with heritage. It's associated with, nautical vibes, which is something that it actually makes sense in the history of the brand of Chanel. So that makes sense for even when you look at the history of the brand and what Coco Chanel herself was into, it makes sense. But then you also need to think, what's the market of people that go to Oxford and Cambridge? Because the funny thing about Oxford and Cambridge is that Oxford and Cambridge, technically, anyone can get into those schools provided that you can afford to pay the fees. And of course, you have the grades. However, it's kind of like a common thing that, Oxford and Cambridge, so many people have gone through there. The prime ministers have gone through there. All of them, a lot of them study PPE at Oxford, a lot of the prime ministers in the UK. Presidents have been there, thought leaders have all gone through Cambridge and Oxford. So there's a prestige there, but also royal families have gone through Oxford and Cambridge, and they always have to keep that going because it helps their prestige. So a lot of times, if you're like part of high society or you have parents who have been to Oxford or Cambridge, it can increase your chances of going there. And that's why there's always like these weird controversies around like who gets to go there, who doesn't get to go there. A story I remember that like wasn't too long ago was this story where people are talking about Prince Edward, because I think Prince Edward got CDD and he still managed to get into Cambridge. And literally no normal person will get into Cambridge with those horrific grades. CDD. And the funny thing is, instead of Cambridge to just say, he's a legacy student, that's why, they literally said that, we don't only take into account grades, we take into account other things, which literally is nonsensical. Because the reason why it's nonsensical is because they normally look for other factors when you have a B, not C though. You'd have to get like A, B, and then they'll be like, okay, we're not completely, looking at your grades, we're looking at other factors. But someone that gets CD probably shouldn't be studying any subject at any university, to be honest, because you'll struggle. I remember when I studied chemical engineering at University of Leeds, they always made a point that one of the big reasons why they couldn't negotiate on grades is because if you don't have the grades that they need, you won't even get past the first year of university. And it's so true, because even some people that still got those grades in, A levels, they still struggled and, left after the first year of studying chemical engineering. So someone that gets CDD, I just can't imagine how you could possibly cope with any of the courses, to be honest. But I say all of this to say that these are the associations that come with Oxford and Cambridge. So this is why, to me, it made a lot of sense for Chanel to be investing in such a historical boat race. Historically, Coco Chanel was actually introduced to sailing by the Duke of Westminster, who owned a yacht that was called the Flying Cloud. Also, she was a major person that used to always go around the French Riviera, and that's where she had that's what added to her design language when she started having a lot of those nautical inspirations in her designs. And the Chanel team has said that, of course, yachting isn't the same as rowing. They're not completely the same. However, the boat race kind of fits perfectly in that sort of elegant nautical history that Chanel has, and they see the parallels there. Another interesting point and fact is that this is actually Chanel's first sponsorship of an event, like first endorsement ever in their history. So that's why a lot went into it, a lot of thoughts went into it, and they had to make sure that it was the right thing. They're also using this boat race as a means to promote their watches. Of course, as you can see on their Instagram page, what they are pushing very heavily right now is the J12 watch. This makes sense. The timing of it makes sense. I mean, the Watches and Wonders event happened recently, and everyone has been talking about that. So my whole feed has been inundated with everyone talking about different watch models. A big example is Rolex came out with a new model called the Land Dweller that everyone is talking about. So that's why you're seeing a lot of rollouts for Chanel's watches themselves. I find the case of Chanel watches really interesting because they're ultra expensive. I mean, look at 10K, 129K, like super, super fine watches. And I think, depending on how you see it, the price is warranted because Chanel uses the same manufacturers that, Breitling and Rolex and Tag Heuer use. And I do think that a lot of luxury brands, like fashion brands specifically, have some really complications on their watches. Me personally, I would feel so weird spending loads of money on a watch by a fashion brand. It would just feel odd. They don't really have the same heritage that a Cartier has in watches, a Tag Heuer, a Rolex, an IWC, a Breitling. So it would just kind of feel odd. And Chanel does have more heritage in watches than a lot of other, designer brands, to be honest. I think Chanel has been making watches since 1987, so not that long ago, but at least they've been at it for a while. But my opinion is quite irrelevant actually, because Chanel, I did research before the stream and I found that Chanel sells bucket loads of watches. Like they actually sell loads of watches. Apparently last year, according to Morgan Stanley, that does a recent annual watch report, they sold 60,000 watches. 60,000, and they made 380 million Swiss francs in revenue, which is insane. I'm like, who is buying these Chanel watches? Clearly some people, there's a massive market for these watches, clearly, even though they're crazy expensive. But me personally, I would rather buy a Cartier watch or an IWC or a Breitling or a Seiko or those kind of watches over a Chanel. But that's just me personally. But yeah, so this is the watch that they've been pushing a lot, the J12. That's why the boat race is also called the J12 boat race. Like I said, they're a massive, massive sponsor. And I think it makes all the sense in the world. Something I think is a massive missed opportunity, and I don't know why, other brands weren't doing this, is why weren't British brands working with the boat race? Why weren't they sponsoring the boat race? Why aren't they more involved? Burberry would be the perfect company to sponsor the boat race. I mean, Burberry is British. When you think of Burberry historically, you think of the greater outdoors. You think of, the trench coats that people were wearing during the World War. You think of the boots that Burberry used to make. You think of waterproofing. You think of adventure. That's what I think about when I think of Burberry and the heritage. That fits perfectly into a boat race. And then obviously the luxury and high class associations. Some of these marketing teams, it's almost like they don't know what they're doing. They have massive marketing budgets, and no one thought it's a good idea to invest in a boat race. It had to take a French brand in Chanel to invest in the boat race. Crazy. Absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. So that's something I found quite shocking, actually. Really, really shocking. But here you can see on YouTube, there's some good documentaries around the boat race, talking about like the history of the race and how the race has advanced over the years. Luke said, I was a Cox for my first time. I really enjoyed it, but those 6 a.m. mornings were not for me. Are you talking about your experience at Cambridge? He said, these Chanel watches are so busted. Those are the secret billionaires buying the watches. I guess so. And yeah, just like Luke is saying, entry requirements minimum are A star AA for arts and A star A for sciences. They don't let people with B now unless they're doing the art foundation. Yeah, exactly. Which is why if you see any member of the royal family getting into Cambridge or Oxford with subpar grades, you know it's just because of the legacy and because it's part of their branding. The reason why these, universities, you have to remember their businesses. So the reason why they continue to stay prestigious is because they can say the last 5 princes all went to an Oxbridge, and the king went to an Oxbridge, and the prime minister went to an Oxbridge. That helps in their branding and their marketing. So it's understandable why they would give certain people leeway. A Cox is a short guy. Oh, sorry. I thought you said a Cox. I wasn't even reading it that way. It's a short guy who shouts at the guys doing the rowing. Oh, yeah. The guy that sits at the front and just shouts commands. Isn't that the person? I'm not a rowing expert by any regard, but isn't that the person that is supposed to know like what the stroke volume is for each of the rowers? So they kind of keep tabs on when they should go harder and when they shouldn't go harder, right? But I could be mistaken. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Luke, because I wouldn't claim to be an expert on rowing at all. But I think that's what they do. I think that's their role. I heard Burberry has quite the history with outdoor wears. I don't know why they didn't do anything with that recently. I mean, Burberry, we just know that Burberry, the whole team just don't know what they're doing for everything from top down. Pricing, branding, marketing, everything about that brand is bad. So nothing surprises me with Burberry anymore. So yeah, okay, Luke says, yeah, it was a lot of work. You have to be on top of everyone. Yeah. I've seen them because the only time I actually ever watch rowing, to be very honest with you, is either when it's the boat race or during the Olympics. Those are honestly the only times I watch it. I know obviously more people in the UK are passionate about rowing. Where I live, there's actually a rowing club. Maybe I should join it to learn more about rowing. But yeah, it's not. We have a pedigree of it in the UK. We win so many world titles, Olympic titles, but it's me personally, I've just never really been that into the sport. But it's interesting to see how much Chanel is willing to invest in the whole thing, to be honest. Rowing is such a commitment at Cambridge, like doing that on top of our degrees was just long. Yeah, because the degrees are so tasking already. So having to do rowing and all those other commitments, that's a bit much, to be honest. Yeah, it does sound like a lot. It really, really does. It does. Let's see. Cambridge men's president. So fancy. So fancy. There was also a lot of controversy around the boat race this year because a lot of people were talking about the fact that some of the rowers weren't eligible to row, and that rarely happens. Even though they were in the rowing event last year, some of the rowers, and that led to a lot of controversy. So across the board, there's been a lot of crazy controversy around the race. And then also, Chanel has said that they're going to be sponsoring this in the long term. So they're going to take learnings and understandings from sponsoring it this year, and they are going to continue sponsoring it up until at least 2028. I do find the way that they've branded the boat race quite tacky, calling it the J12 boat race. It just sounds, because the boat race to me is something that I see as something very prestigious, very, it has a certain pizzazz to it. It has a certain je ne sais quoi. And over marketing it and adding all this marketing crap like J12 boat race, which is the name of the Chanel watch, it's just a bit much. Leave the boat race as the boat race. You can put your Chanel logos on the side of the water on the River Thames when they are rowing. I understand if you do that, but I think them calling it J12, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that, to be honest. I don't really know how I feel about that. But yeah, that is really the conversation about the Chanel boat race. Like I said, I will be watching with close eyes to see what they do tomorrow, see how exactly they brand it, see how the marketing rollout is, and I'm very much looking forward to tomorrow's race. This YouTube channel runs on your support. If you want to support the channel, you can subscribe to my Patreon. You'll gain access to exclusive content that includes everything from my Patreon podcast, where I give a behind-the-scenes insight into the fashion industry, as well as a fashion book club, where I review my favorite fashion books. You can also check out my fashion ebook, which highlights the best fashion journalists to follow, definitions of common fashion terminology, and how to determine what a good source of fashion information is. The links to everything are in the description below.